I'm going to show you how to make a Parmesan that you can use at home that's fully plant-based. And this is actually, I find, much tastier than that ubiquitous powdered Parmesan, actual dairy Parmesan, although I always find it a little questionable about what's actually in those containers. But we'll use this for the plant-based pesto, but it's actually great to use any place that you would, see those little packets of powdered Parmesan or anything that you want to add, like a savory, salty, just a little bit more interesting flavor to it. It just needs a little something. So go ahead and get started. This is a really simple recipe. It's really hard to do if you don't have a food processor. So if that's you, I might skip this one. You can, we'll give you some replacements in the recipes we'll use it for if you're not going to make it yourself. If you have a jar, just any jar with a lid, make sure it's well cleaned and dried ahead of time. But this will keep for months, really as long as nuts would keep in your refrigerator. So, make a full batch, keep it as long as you need. I've never actually had it go bad before I've run out of it. So. In the recipe, it gives you a few options. So we have some almonds that have been roasted and some raw cashews. You could use either roasted or raw nuts. The roasted gives it a little bit more complex, stronger nutty flavor. The raw is a little more mild and mellow. And you can use either almonds or cashews or any other nut you like. If you want it to be really just kind of melt into and not stand out too much in what you're making, I would use all raw cashews. I like a mix, just a little more interesting without being overpowering. And then an ingredient you also want to make sure not to leave out is called nutritional yeast. So this is actually, again, a plant-based product. It's really high in vitamin B12, and so it's like a dried yeast. You can't replace baking yeast that you would use for, say, bread or other baking. It really has to be nutritional yeast. And you can find it at many major grocery stores now. It's becoming more and more common and popular. And that can sit on the shelf for years. It really doesn't go bad either, so you don't have to worry about that. It's also used in a few other recipes in the course if you're interested in making those. And then we'll add a little bit of garlic powder. You can, if you want just more of a cheesy flavor, use the lower end of what's in the recipe, about 1/4 teaspoon. And then if you want it to have more of a garlic flavor, you can double that. So I'll just make it with the lower end there, about 1/4 teaspoon. And then there's some salt. Cheese is very salty, so there is a fair amount of salt. You have to remember though, you're just going to use a tiny amount of this after it's made in any given recipe or on top of any dish. So even though it looks like a lot, you're not actually adding that much sodium to whatever you're going to be putting in your mouth. So I'm just going to put the top on this food processor. And we're going to use the pulsing function and just pulse until it's kind of a meal. You basically want to have it look about the same texture and consistency as powdered Parmesan cheese. It's a fine line between getting it to be that kind of powdery consistency and having it turn into nut butter. So you can also scrape down the sides if yours is not evenly chopping. I usually get it right to the point where it starts to look like there's a little bit becoming more like nut butter, and then call it good at that point. So I think you can see in there, you can see that it's this nice powdery consistency, and that's really what you're aiming for. That's all there is to this plant-based Parmesan recipe.